Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to let the room dial down, let people join the session. We'll be with you shortly. Thank you all for joining. As I say, we'll be with you again shortly. Just going to let people join the session. Fantastic. Right, I'm going to get started. People are still joining, but we've got quite a lot that we want to kind of cover off today, so I'm going to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Richard Ayres, and I'm a social care advisor to Care England. And I want to welcome you to today's webinar, The Care Talent, Securing the Workforce via Skills, Wellbeing and Smart Benefits. Today's session is focused on one of the most critical challenges facing our sector, how we attract, retain and support a sustainable workforce. We will explore in the session today the current labour markets, the realities providers are facing on the ground, and importantly, the practical strategies that are genuinely making a difference when it comes to recruitment and retention of workforce and well-being. So this is not really about theory today. This is about what's actually moving the dial, how providers can better position themselves in a highly competitive labour market, how we strengthen our employee value proposition as a sector, and how skills, well-being and smarter benefits can be used more effectively to secure and retain talent across the sector. We're also very conscious that as a sector, we often undersell the breadth of career opportunities within social care, and there are multiple pathways, progression routes, and specialisms people can choose. Yet too often we struggle to articulate these clearly to potential candidates. Today's session will challenge that and provide some practical insight into how this can be addressed. So we're really pleased to be joined from colleagues from Total Jobs, who are working very closely with the sector and bringing both data and insight into what is happening across the recruitment landscape in adult social care. First of all, we're going to hear from Julius Provost, the senior economist at Total Jobs, who will set out the labour market context and what we're seeing across the employment trends and across the care sector. And then Julius is going to hand over to Andrew Jones, the UK manager for Care Specialist team, and Calvin Benton, the director of Specialist Markets, who between them will explore how providers can really strengthen their attraction strategies and better position themselves to secure candidates and really understand approaches around retention, workforce engagement, and the role of benefits and wellbeing in supporting our very valuable asset, our care staff. We've attempted to take on board some advanced questions submitted at the registration stage, many of which were absolutely excellent, really engaging and directly aligned to today's discussion, particularly around recruitment challenges, the workforce motivation and career pathways and retention. So our presenters will talk for around about 30 minutes, after which we will go into a Q&A where you can ask questions directly to our panel today. If you prefer to ask a question privately, then you are free to email me and I will drop my details into the chat and ask that question anonymously on your behalf. So I will put my email address in the chat shortly. We do ask that you keep yourself muted during the presentation, but at the end, if time allows, we'll open the floor for hands up questions and answer any of those that have come up in the chat. So as always with our webinars, we will be recording the session and we will circulate the recording, a copy of the slides and any follow-up questions we don't get to answer on the call within 48 hours, along with the contact details of our colleagues at Total Jobs, should you wish to reach out to any of them directly. So without further ado, please let me hand over to Julius. Julius, please kick us off today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Julius, senior economist, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the UK economy and labor market and what that means for the care sector. Dialing in today from a hotel room in Budapest, to be honest, from a so let me start with an overview so we can go to the next slide. And just discuss a little bit how the labor market is changing. And if we go on to the next slide, then we can see that there are kind of two very important trends right now. So unfortunately, the labor market in the UK has weakened a little bit. The unemployment rate has increased from about 4.5% some 2 years ago to 5.2% recently. So that's an increase in the unemployment rate of 1 percentage point. Historically, that is still reasonably low if we compare that to any point in time over the last 2 or 3 decades. But obviously, relatively to the last 2 years, certainly an increase, certainly a weaker labor market. If we look at payroll employment, the number of people who are employees in the UK, so self-employment is excluded. Why would we look at payroll employment? Just because the data is better, it's more accurate, it's based on HMRC tax collection data. We can see that there have been some 100,000 jobs lost since the middle of 2024. So there are roughly around 30 million payroll employees in the UK. 100,000 jobs lost over the last 1.5 years. That is obviously definitely not good. It's not recessionary. It's not a disaster, but obviously not a great trend. What we see though as well is that the job losses have bottomed out, and over the last 3 months, payroll employment has picked up a little bit. So the labor market is definitely stabilizing. Though what must be emphasized when we look at current global economic trends, the oil shock, what's happening with Iran, everybody is anticipating higher inflation, lower economic growth, and that will have an impact on the labor market. If we go to the next slide, then we can have a look at the care sector specifically. And so what is interesting is that if we look at sectoral employment in the UK, then we can see that most sectors have actually been quite flat. If we look at retail and hospitality, that's kind of like where most of the job losses have been concentrated. The rise in national insurance contribution played a big part. The massive increases in the minimum wage played a big part. But if we look at healthcare specifically, it is the main engine of job creation in the UK. So over the last couple of months, or rather over the last couple of years, several 100,000 jobs have been created in the healthcare sector. Some 1 to 200,000 over the last 3 years alone. And if we look at all the job creation since the beginning of the pandemic, we see that the sector is actually responsible for some 45% of all the jobs created since 2020, some 600,000. Yeah. And if we look at the chart on the right, that's the number of vacancies in the healthcare sector. Obviously, similar to other economic sectors, we see that massive economic boom, that massive vacancy boom, hiring demand in 2022 and 2023. There has been quite a bit of slowdown over the last 2 years, but vacancies remain reasonably high, at least when compared to other sectors. So we are now basically back to 2019 levels, some 120,000 vacancies in the sector. The vacancy rate is a little bit lower than in 2019, but historically speaking, still reasonably high. So healthcare is kind of like defying the trend of slower job creation. And well, obviously, the main reason is that healthcare is kind of like a very acyclical sector. It doesn't move as much as other sectors during the business cycle. If we look at the next slide, just having a brief look at kind of like where we are in terms of inflation and wage growth and so on. The UK has been a tiny little bit of an outlier. Inflation was obviously very high during the years following the pandemic. It has slowed down quite a bit. We are currently at 3% inflation, just a little under 3%. Now, obviously, with the oil shock, unfortunately, that might change. Projections are that we will go back to 4% potentially, maybe even a little bit higher. Wage growth over the last year, nominal wage growth has been still around 5 to 6%, depending on the sector. Though wages are coming down a little bit as well, over the last year, employees finally have seen some real wage gains again. Adjusted for inflation, they have seen more. They've had a little bit more money in their pockets. because nominal wage growth has been higher than inflation. Yeah. If we look at median pay in the healthcare sector, that's the chart on the right. It's roughly very similar to median pay for the whole economy, right? Median is the person in the middle, so that's slightly below average. Average is often skewed by outliers. These big spikes are basically caused by NHS bonus payments that have happened over the last couple of years. They occur potentially once a year, sometimes less often, but that's what's causing the spike in pay. But the healthcare sector is kind of like paying very close to the median across all sectors. Obviously, the variation between high pay and low pay is relatively high as well. Yeah, doctors obviously having high pay in the care sector, whereas like care assistants, nurses, and so on have lower pay. Yeah, so that was for me basically a little bit of on the economic outlook, and I would pass it on to you guys now.
Okay, so thanks, Julius, Richard, and again, thanks for everybody for joining today. So if we get into the data, the headline number for social care right now is 28,870. That's the median advertised salary for the sector, and that's up 6%, as Julius mentioned there. That's real growth driven by minimum wage increases and competitive pressures as employers fight for the same sort of experienced talent. But here's what makes this market particularly complex. We have a deeply divided workforce. We've got 41% of social care professionals of what we call confident switchers that actively look in or planning to look for a new role in 2026, but an almost identical 41% of risk-averse stayers. So they're prioritising stability, especially in uncertain economic conditions, as Julius has pointed out. They're not really all willing to even look to move. The implication for you as employers is significant. The candidates you most want, experienced specialists already embedded in care, are often not the ones actively applying. So job ads alone won't always reach them. You need a retention strategy as much as a recruitment strategy. But on the latter, you need to think about how to attract the passive candidates who are currently sitting tight. So what is the challenge? I mean, in a nutshell, it's three things. We've got a split workforce, as we mentioned there. We've got engaged potential switchers on one side, cautious stayers on the other. We've got a satisfaction gap as well. So social care has some of the lowest job satisfaction rates in the UK labour market. And that's a real driver of the turnover problems. And the goal, which we're going to build towards today, is a triple lock strategy. So to secure your people through well-being, attract new ones through smart benefits and transparency, and then future-proof through skills.
Yeah, and it's also worth putting the financial reality on the table. Despite salary growth, 60% of social care workers did receive a pay rise last year, but it's worth pointing out the average was just 2 to 3%. And I think we all know with the cost of living where it is, that's barely keeping pace. 32% of social care workers are cutting back on essential spending. And I'm not talking about discretionary, but essentials, important things like food, heating, and even getting to work. That is the day-to-day reality for a significant portion of your workforce. So when we talk about retention, we're not just talking about people being tempted away by a competitor offering an extra 50p an hour. We're actually talking about people being ground down by financial stress and burnout. Those are very different problems. And of course, you'd agree they need very different solutions. So let's get into that one first. Andy, we've got the foundation. Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, so before we can attract new people, we've got to stabilise the ones that we already have. So the principle behind this section, and the data tells us very clearly, is where the pressure points are. So a third of social care workers are cutting back on the basics, as CJ mentioned there. We've got food, heating, and travel to work. That's financial anxiety showing up in your staff room, and every shift, every day, it affects concentration. You've got morale issues, and it affects how people to show up for the individuals they're caring for as well, obviously, which is a big issue. And it's one of the most significant and the most overlooked drivers of the turnover in the sector. So people don't always leave care because they want to leave care. You know, see the data, they leave care because they simply can't afford to stay.
Yeah, so the number one driver, and this is the finding from our research that I think should give every social care employer real pause. Across virtually every other sector we survey, earning more money is the number one career goal. In social care, it isn't. It's reducing stress. 41% of social care workers name that as their primary career goal for 2026. So higher than a pay rise, higher than progression, higher than anything else. And think about what that tells you. When your people's biggest professional ambition is simply to feel less overwhelmed, that's not a pay problem. That's a workload, a culture, a well-being problem. And it's one that salary increases alone won't solve. So what can you actually do about it? Andy's got some ideas.
Well, if we think about the solutions, so we've got three overlapping areas, and the encouraging news on this is sort of none of them require sort of significant investment. So the first one, and we speak to a lot of people obviously in the industry, and some people have it, some people don't, but virtual GP access. This is particularly powerful for shift workers, people who can't get access to a GP appointment during standard working hours. So the 24-hour access to a doctor reduces the anxiety of being unwell, reduces days lost to waiting for appointments, and also sends a clear signal to your team that you take their health very, very seriously. And it's available through group platforms at very reasonable rates as well. Second is enhanced sick pay above the statutory minimum. So statutory sick pay isn't huge. It's there to support, but can people get by on that? Not really. So someone on a care worker salary, being ill can be a financial nightmare. Even offering enhanced sick pay for a limited period, like the first week or two of illness, meaningfully reduces the anxiety, that reduces the likelihood of people dragging themselves into work when they feel unwell because they generally can't afford not to come into work. And then third, we've got mental health support as standard, not as a perk. Right now, only 20% of social care candidates say they want mental health support from their employer. We'd argue that's because most simply don't expect to get it. So moving mental health provision from an optional extra to this is just how we do things here changes your culture, it reduces burnout, and genuinely differentiates your employer brand. So things like mental health first aid training, access to counselling, regular check-ins, none of these have to be expensive.
Yeah, so the common thread here is that these benefits address the specific anxieties that social care workers actually carry, not gym memberships, not share schemes, financial security, health access, and the sense that someone is genuinely paying attention to how they are doing. Get those right, and you have a foundation to build everything else on. Now, let's look at how you use that foundation to start attracting candidates who aren't currently considering you. Andy, the deal breaker gap, take us through that.
Yeah, so the framing here is deliberate. It's a competitive benefits package on a social care budget. We know budgets are constrained. That is a given in the sector. The question is how you maximise the impact of what you can offer. And again, the data gives us a very clear answer. The biggest wins are available to employers right now. They don't cost anything extra. They actually come from advertising what you already have. So let's start with the flexibility gap. We've asked social care candidates what benefit they most want from an employer. Flexible working hours came in at number one. 46% named it their top desired benefit. Now here's the gap. Only 6% of social care ads mention flexible working. 46% of people want it. 6% of jobs advertise it. Now that's a significant and largely self-inflicted disconnect. Now, obviously I know the instinct is to say, care doesn't really work like that. We've got rotas, we've got shift patterns. We can't just offer flexible hours. And you're right, that flexibility in care does look differently. It's a flexibility, let's say, in a marketing agency or a bank, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Shift swapping arrangements, influence over your own rotas, compressed hours, consistent days. These are all sort of meaningful forms of flexibility for care workers. And if you do offer them, they need to be in your job ad, because if candidates don't see it advertised, they'll assume it isn't available. So the second gap is career progression. 53% of candidates say a lack of visible progression is a reason they won't apply. That's more than half, obviously. If your job ad describes a caregiver role with no mention of where it can lead, senior care staff, team leader, deputy manager, registered manager, you're losing more than half your potential applicants before they even get to the application form, which obviously is a big issue. Now, we've seen and heard some really inspiring examples of this over the last sort of 8-9 months. Myself and CJ, we've been to forums, we've been to events, we've been to award ceremonies. People in leadership positions who started as support workers or care assistants, they're prevalent in this particular sector, and something not just individual companies should talk about, to be honest. But as a value proposition across the sector, I think Richard mentioned that earlier, this is about a value proposition across the sector to highlight opportunities in the sector that the sector brings. I know I'm digressing here a little bit, but the sector has a lot to give from an opportunity point of view, as well as a career that really has a positive impact to people's lives. And we should be shouting from the rooftops about that. But hopefully that's something we can really help with and drive change on this in the not too distant future.
Thank you, Andy. And of course, then there's the salary transparency, which at this point is simply table stakes. 80% of social care candidates will skip a job ad that doesn't include a salary. So to put that into context, that's 8 in 10 people you've spent money to advertise to, scrolling straight past because there isn't a number on the page. Social care is actually doing better than the national average here. 53% of social care ads include salary information, which is above the cross-sector figure, but that still means nearly half of social care roles are being advertised without pay information. And given that 80% of your target candidates are actively filtering those out, that's a significant and entirely avoidable loss. The fix couldn't be simpler. Just simply add a salary, and if it's a range, say so. If there are enhancements, sleep-in rates, mileage, enhanced bank holiday pay, mention them. The more complete the picture you paint before someone applies, the more trust you build, and the more committed the people who do apply will be.
So the immediate action from this section is straightforward. Go back and audit your current job ads against these 3 questions. Does it include the salary? Does it mention flexible working in whatever form that takes in your particular business setting? And does it show a progression pathway? If the answer is no to any of those, you have a quick win sitting right there. So rewrite those job ads, and no doubt you will see a direct impact on application volumes coming through. And think about the framing as you do that as well. So you're not advertising a caregiver vacancy, you're advertising the start of the career in social care with visible steps forward. Show people where this role can take them, because that's what turns a passive browser into an active applicant. So if you have video content on your website, on your careers page, or you have access to job ads that offer that, put some videos on there with people that have been through that journey, and it will really help drive applicants.
Okay, this one is about thinking fundamentally different about who you're hiring and why. Andy, over to you on the skills premium, please.
Yeah, so we look at the most advertised roles. So most advertised role in the social care sector is caregiver, and that's where the competition for experienced staff is fiercest. Support worker is second, home care staff third, then senior care staff, and then night support workers. So these are high volume, always on type positions. And because every social care employer is fishing the same pool for experienced candidates, you end up in a bit of a bidding war. Salaries get pushed up and you're poaching from each other. And the underlying supply problem never ever gets resolved because of that. The alternative is to change who you're looking for.
So I want to make this personal for a moment because I think it illustrates the point better than any data point can. As you might see from the grey hairs, I've spent the best part of 25 years in sectors where the transferable skills are almost identical to what care needs. Hospitality, customer service, high pressure, people first environments where your ability to stay calm, read a room, and put someone else's comfort ahead of your own is the job. The technical skills are different, but the human qualities are identical. There are people right now in hospitality, retail, early years, community youth work, customer service, who have exactly the qualities that make someone exceptional in care. Empathy under pressure, resilience, the ability to communicate clearly with someone who's distressed, the instinct to put someone else's needs first. Those are the soft skills you cannot train. The care-specific technical knowledge, medication administration, manual handling, digital care planning, you absolutely can train for. And let's remember, as social care digitizes, there's a second dimension to this, tech readiness. You don't need candidates who already know your care management software. You need candidates who can demonstrate they're able to learn. That's a very different and much broader question to ask an interview, of course.
So practically, this means shifting your interview questions. Instead of telling me about your experience in a care setting, tell me about a time you've had to stay calm and keep someone else calm in a really difficult situation, or describe a time when you've had to manage competing urgent demands from different people simultaneously. So you're testing for resilience, composure, prioritization, and you'll find candidates from outside the sector who answer those questions brilliantly. So, and then you build your onboarding to cover the care-specific technical skills for those who don't already have them, as CJ mentioned earlier. This is a standard investment in any new hire, to be honest, and it opens your talent pool significantly, though. So the payoff is that you attract people who are genuinely motivated to work in care, not those who arrive there by accident. And those people are obviously the people that tend to stay longer.
Absolutely. So the triple lock checklist, let's bring it all together with the triple lock framework. And of course, in a sector where the median salary is £28,870, you cannot win on pay alone. You win by offering the deal breakers that your competitors are ignoring. The triple lock gives you a framework for doing that systematically, and it doesn't require enormous budgets. It requires intention and execution. So we look at the first lock, which is stabilize through financial and mental well-being. Andy, over to you on that.
Yeah, so we need to address the anxiety that's grinding the workforce down. So obviously from the survey, I mean, this comes up highly. So virtual GP access, the enhanced sick pay we mentioned, and mental health support as standard, not just as extras. These are high impact, relatively low cost investments that make people feel secure enough to stay, but confident enough to commit as well. So lock 2, attract, flexibility and transparency.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really important to look at rewriting your job ads where necessary. Include things like the salary, mention the flexible working you already offer, show the progression pathway from caregiver all the way through to management. These are things most of your competitors are not doing, and they are deal breakers for the majority of your potential applicants. And then, of course, there's lock 3, future-proof, hire for resilience and tech readiness. Andy, what have you got on that?
Yeah, so we mentioned earlier about the interview questions. So shift to competency-based hiring. Look beyond the social care sector for talent with the right underlying qualities. We're going to interview for resilience. We're going to interview for empathy and adaptability, and train for the technical skills. So this gives you access to talent pools that aren't being competed over right now. And it builds a workforce that's better positioned for a digitizing sector as well.
So importantly, 3 things: stabilize, attract, future-proof. And these don't need enormous budgets, as I said. They require intention and execution. And if you want to go deeper on any of it, the Total Jobs Salary Hub has the full social care salary trends report for 2026, along with benchmarking tools and a growing resource library. It's well worth a look after today. So we've come to the point for questions. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I'm going to pass you over to Richard, who I'm sure has some questions coming through.
Thank you very much. We have had a few questions. I've got a couple on email and a couple of points made in the chat as well, but I just wanted to thank you very much. I think I do like the concept of the triple lock, stabilize, attract and future proof, really looking at our existing team. It's not necessarily just always a recruitment strategy. Sometimes it's a retention strategy, because if we retain those that we've already got and we do it well and we look after their mental health, we support them with their well-being, and we offer tools that help them to stay employed, that saves us a huge amount of money and a huge amount of stress as an employer, because it costs us about £6,000 a year to recruit one person over a 12-month period. So it's a huge, I think our sector in the last couple of years spent nearly £3 billion a year recruiting and retaining the staff that we've got. Attracting people, values-based recruitment is a big thing for our sector, making sure people possess the right values, and that they are ready to kind of embrace technology. As you said, they don't have to know the system. They just need to have a mindset that's going to engage in technology, because that's going to really change. And a lot of these things don't cost money. You know, they can just be reworked job descriptions, and we can make those implement those small changes relatively easily. I think you also just talked very, about some stats there around flexible hours. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago now, and one person told me they had 28 different shift patterns for their staff, but they hadn't had any agency expenditure for a year because they had a really flexible, diverse shift arrangement. And there are many of us that do think within that rigid environment as it's got to be the kind of the 8 hour, the 12-hour shifts. And with the Employment Rights Act coming and the Fair Pay Agreement, we are going to have to start to change our approach and have technology that helps us support offering that variety of shifts and what have you. So incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. I made lots of notes there, so I shall be looking at those as we go. But I've got a few questions to ask you. There is a question or a point made in the chat around the virtual GP and EAP solutions. And of course, yes, the virtual GP will issue a private prescription that can be more expensive. It can also be cheaper than an NHS prescription. But obviously, if you've already got a prepayment, then it is going to be more expensive. What we've always suggested is that if you need that appointment, you need that prescription, then that's something that you can tap into and you can get access to straight away if your need is there. But you can also take the requirement that you've been seen by a GP to your GP and ask them to reissue a prescription if necessary. So I understand that principle. But another great observation there around advertising that you've got free parking on site. That's a huge benefit for a lot of places. A huge benefit. And just going back onto the EAP, when we send the copy of the recording and the slides out, we will send you a link to our own EAP solution with Vivat Perk Box, which for sort of about £5 a year per individual, you can get that virtual GP, you can get those 6 counselling sessions, you can get a lot of mental health support. So that support is out there and it's really affordable. Costs the same amount as a blue light card for the vast majority of organisations. So a quick question for you here is that why do we as a sector really struggle to articulate clear career pathways, and how can we kind of start to improve on that? Because you've talked about how pathways and career progression is really important to interview. How can we kind of change our approach?
I think that's a good question, and I think it's just about slowing down a little bit. I mean, it's a very fast-paced environment. Again, we talk about always on positions. So to really sort of take a step back and look at strategically what you have in your current workforce who've been on those journeys about talking about that career pathway. Every company probably on this call, every business in care, have probably got these sort of careers there. So it's just about portraying that, and putting that out there. You as much as the job ad has to be realistic, you have to make sure that you understand the challenges of the role. But you'd also look at the real life examples of people who've started where they started and got to where they've gone. So, again, we talked about video content on your website. Get these talking heads sort of live if somebody's willing to do that. There's job adverts out there with video content where you can actually portray these. You've got company profile pages. This sort of stuff, these touch points with potential candidates will really make a difference if you have that career journey already instilled in your business. So that's the thing I do. Look at the things you already have available. Look at the people you have that have made that journey, and put them out to market. Let candidates see this journey.
We do know that a lot of people in adult social care do want career pathways, and if we want people to stay within the sector for 20, 30 or 40 years as a career, we need to offer those pathways. That's
they're there, Richard. I think they're there. We, like I say, myself and CJ have done lots of touring over the last sort of 12 months in certain sort of events and stuff, and a lot of these pathways are there, and they're already instilled into these businesses. People have trodden these pathways before, so we've just got to put them out there and show that this is a real career choice.
If I could just add to that, I think often there's a perception of what it's like working in an industry without actually really knowing what it's like working in an industry. And I think having that honesty and transparency in some of that first outreach with job seekers is really important. We need to put ourselves in the mindset of a job seeker, bearing in mind we're trying to bridge a skill shortage by tapping into other pools of talent. And I think that's really important. You're having to double down on what the value proposition is, what the benefits are like, what the career progression could look like, and try and reach out and engage different people based on their terms. And I think often what we see are job ads that unfortunately, and it's not just care, it's all industry sectors, where job ads fall slightly short of candidate expectations, or don't go on to inspire people to think about what it's like working in that company or in that industry. And I think that takes some real thought process. What are our initial outreach communications to job seekers?
And I don't think it's necessarily always about just a promotion and moving from care worker to senior care worker to
Yeah.
deputy manager to manager. It's sometimes about the skills that you can develop, and career progression can be around skills, moving into more health related tasks, delegated healthcare tasks. Those types of things can have a significant impact. I do want to move on to another question actually around we work in a very highly competitive sector. So we are care workers that we're trying to attract, or staff to work within our care services that we're trying to attract, are also being attracted to hospitality and retail. So what are some of the most effective strategies currently being used to attract candidates in such a competitive market?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with that. I mean, we've mentioned some of these on the data there. So flexibility, lead with flexibility, not just pay. But I think one thing that the care sector has, amongst the others, is that make a difference. And we've got to put that real life impact that working in care has. So whether you're supporting independence at home, building long-term relationships with clients, being part of the local community, I think not those other sort of sectors, retail and hospitality, can't offer that. So the unique selling point, I suppose, of the care industry is that making a difference, and you can really tap into people's emotions and empathy with the sector, because it really does make a difference. So I think that's one of the things that I would say, absolutely, that's our USP in the sector and something we need to lead with.
Yeah,
Rich, let me quick add just one point here.
please.
So obviously, what you're saying is totally right. The care sector is competing with hospitality and retail. I would say, at least right now, the care sector has kind of like one competitive advantage, which is that it offers a little bit more stability. Given that over the last year, there have been actually quite a few job losses, both in retail and the hospitality sector. Whereas care obviously is a little bit less dependent on the business cycle. We have like aging populations. People will continue to need care whether the economy is in a downturn or not. So the care sector is kind of like less volatile during the business cycle. And we've seen that care employment has actually grown, whereas retail and hospitality has contracted moderately. So that is at least one competitive advantage right now that I'm kind of seeing.
That's a really good point to make. I mean, there's nothing is really recession proof, but we're as a recession proof as we can kind of make it, because the people are still going to need care. We're still going to have an aging population. We know we've got considerable growth within the aged care sector, so it does offer that level of security. I think security is the right point to make there. And Julie's put a great comment in the chat there as well around having 13 different role types, and the need to reach out to schools and colleges to present a true career pathway. And I think there's another really important point there, is that we as care services do need to be more open and receptive and capable of bringing in work experience, people who want to sort of come from colleges. Health and social care is one of the most studied subjects, yet we very often close our doors to those students for work experience. We know that with nurses, when a nurse comes and does working within a care home and also in a hospital as part of their experience, they're far more likely to come to the care home for their work when they come to look for a placement. So we do need to be more open there. And Kerry's also made a point there, agreeing with Julie, thinking about that for a while, and came up with some really good pointers. Yeah, so AI can be really helpful there as well. I think the other point is AI is not going to take over much of our care. So still very, very future proof in that respect. I am going to ask Claire to pop in with a question. I've just seen Claire's hand pop up.
Thanks,
Claire,
Richard. So apologies, I joined a little bit late into the call, but I've enjoyed and appreciated everything that has been discussed so far. A quick question would be to get your insights and your thoughts. We hire and we employ colleagues from Gen Z to baby boomers. So when we come to write job ads, it's very difficult to have a one size fits all that's going to attract the Gen Zs, the millennials, etc., etc. So I just wonder what your thoughts are in terms of how we, so perhaps we consider moving away from that one size fits all, because quite frankly, you can't do that in a short job ad without losing people, and they've got bored at the 50th line in the job ad. So I really appreciate, perhaps, and apologies if you've covered this aspect, but sort of your thoughts and insights on that.
Well, I mean,
Take this procedure.
firstly, thank you, Claire, for the question. And it's a really important question, actually, because, how do you attract, how do you engage with so many different people who all like to be engaged and communicated to quite differently? And of course, when recruiting, we're trying to cast the net as wide as possible. And you're doing that sometimes with a single job ad. And I would argue that's possibly the first thing to consider is, should you put a couple of different job ads, trial and error tested? I think that's certainly a good way forward. But also with the recruiters or mediums that you use is to look at the different tools, candidate engagement tools. For example, at Total Jobs, we have something, and this isn't a sale, this is just a different way to actually engage with candidates, targeted emails. You can segment very specific sets of people based on certain criteria. You can design a template, communication, and you can send that email out to those people based on suitable criteria. And you can try that in multiple ways, targeting different segments of people. I would say there's probably not a silver bullet.
No.
Every company is different, and of course everyone's got different challenges based on location, skill set requirement, volume of hires. I would say trial and error. Don't assume that the way you're doing it now is the only way. Ask colleagues. I think what these events do so well is it brings people together. And I think as an industry, we need to be sharing best practice. What works for someone? Take an interest, ask the question, go to more industry events, have these discussions. And I think really that's what makes this industry so brilliant, is we're all asking that question. And I bet you there's some great examples out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've had a couple of really good comments put in the chat around that, and I think the different platforms can appeal to different people. And it's about understanding sort of where did those good ones come from, and how can we exploit those channels, because different demographics do things differently, and you can actually have a slightly different message on different platforms in different parts of your attraction process. Very, very helpful. Thank you. Is someone else going to comment there? Andrew, were you going to come back in? Sorry.
I was just going to ask Claire if you do some sort of internal sort of employee engagement as well, so you can get an understanding of where your current people come from. And Richard just sort of mentioned it there about what they would like to see. If you was looking at a job, what would you like to see? And then obviously you gain that information, and then as CJ mentioned, you put that out to market in some sort of trial jobs and stuff like that. But it'd be interesting to see what is it the same stuff at the core? Is it just the language we use? Is it the imagery we use? But is it the same fundamentals of the job, which obviously you've got to make sure you highlight those?
Yeah, there is that. I think the fact is that we really recognise that given the challenges we face as a sector with losing overseas sponsorship colleagues, that's going to leave us with quite a gap to fill. So we're trying to preempt what's going to hit us in the years ahead. So we're almost segmenting our approach in terms of, well, what does sort of our EVP look like for this demographic or this demographic? And it's also it's mentioning what sort of, I think Jessica wrote it in a comment in terms of sort of TikTok, social media platforms. We recognise that we're going to maybe reach more people through that, say in your Gen Zers versus actually more mature candidates coming in, maybe more on the Facebook side of things. It's really clear. I mean, I can see it amongst my own friendship group. There's various of us who are more comfortable with Facebook, but throw TikTok at us and we really have no clue. But so yeah, I think it's really sort of that perspective is and also to your point earlier, making sure that our careers site on our website reflects all those different demographics and case studies of different routes into social care. So for those, we've got one around a guy who was in the Metropolitan Police in the armed unit, and so he was sort of walking around with a gun, and now he's working in supported living because he's retired, and what a sea change that is in terms of career. So having some examples of that that just perhaps dispel, and it's that myth busting as well, particularly in working age adult social care. It's not your stereotypical view as to what social care looks like. It's going on holiday with individuals and helping people to achieve the best outcomes that they can achieve. So it's as you say, it's not a silver bullet, but it's how do you try and encapsulate that and then share that with an audience that is so varied, so that you get that diversity of candidates coming through for your vacancies.
Yeah,
it's a huge challenge, but there's a huge opportunity, and you need to start looking at that data. I'd love to see, Jessica, if you're able to ever send us the outcome of your findings. I would love to read that. That would be very, very interesting to understand. But yes, I think we've tended to be, as a sector, quite vanilla and quite bland and quite generic in our approaches. But as you've mentioned there, Claire, and Total Jobs have you said as well, is that we can do things in very, very different ways to attract very, very different people who are equally as fantastic for our sector.
Richard, can I just come to one further point on that as well? Because obviously you mentioned, I think we both mentioned about an EVP for the sector. We've mentioned about taking sort of, taking people, it sounds wrong, but from hospitality and retail. And that for me is really important. Actually, if you're thinking, if we want to target hospitality candidates, if you like, what do we do? How do we track those? What's their demographic? So I think from a sector point of view as well, we need to be joined up with this and make sure that we're all being consistent with the messaging, the imagery, and the targeting of where we, because listen, as we mentioned, and Julius mentioned earlier, this sector is growing. We've got an aging population. The demand is going to get higher. We really need to fix that gap now, and we need to look at unique ways and be joined up as a sector to make sure that we achieve that challenge or overachieve that challenge.
Absolutely. And I think we probably sort of covered this next question, but it really around what you think the strongest kind of motivators are shaping workforce decisions today. And I would say some of it is actually the type of work as well. There are certain people who get to a certain age, like myself, and actually you talk about the retired police officer there, Claire. Some of us actually want to do something a bit more meaningful, a bit more purposeful, maybe to earn our place upstairs.
Yeah.
But our views change. Julie mentioned earlier as well, trying to attract younger people. The younger person is very, very different to her. But what are some of those, strongest motivators for the different types of people that really make a difference? Do you think?
I mean, I suppose that one of the biggest things is, we've got to remove barriers for entry as well. So, if you're going to attract people to a sector from all aspects, you've got to make sure that they know what they're doing. You've got to be transparent about the role. You've got to give training from day one. You've got to make sure you put that out there. But also, I think that, if you're looking at sort of a skills gap, the training has to be, as much as you can't put everything on the job ad, but you have to make sure that, you're going to go from A to B, and here's the timescales for that as well. So again, it's just be about transparent at the very entry point, because the last thing you want to do is attract someone who is potentially on a career change, come to the industry. You've not been transparent. The role's very different. The shift roles are not as flexible as you want, and then you lose them. You lose them for good. So I think if we're going to say something as an industry that this is what we're about, this is what we're going to do, we have to do it. We have to act on that and make sure we realise that.
So I think if you're looking for someone, if you're looking to employ someone just to do a task, then they will do a task. They're probably going to get fed up with that task for a period of time. There's no aspiration. There's no transparency. They don't know where they're going. They're probably going to be the ones that move around somewhere else that does offer them that something additional. So I think that transparency, being upfront, what's the role? What does it look like? What does the future look like? What could it be? What training? What progression? What can I do within that role is incredibly important to try and get into that job script without making it kind of like 50 pages long to say, look at how wonderful it could be. That's a challenge, but there are some on this call I know who are absolutely achieving that. So it is definitely possible. So obviously you did talk at the on the earlier part around kind of the retention side of things as well. And I think, Skills for Care data 2017, I think it said it was £6,222 to recruit and retain someone for a 12-month period. Now, that was in 2017. We've moved on nearly 10 years. So I would imagine that cost in that first year is significantly higher now. And we haven't seen recruitment costs come down. We've seen them go up because we've got a lot of competition, a lot of private equity invested in recruitment technology. So costs of recruiting has increased. What can providers do to improve retention so that they don't have so much of a recruitment issue and it's more around retention? What are some of those retention things that they can work on?
So I'll come in on that actually, because I think if we all think about it, probably not a lot different to what we all individually want in our lives. And I think it's, for me, it would be ensuring that everybody has purpose, that they feel valued, they feel understood, that there are good processes in place and they are well communicated internally, and that there is support and training. And I think these are some of the fundamentals. And I know recently Andy and I did some judging, and we were absolutely wowed by the incredible work that this industry does. And I think we should shout out more about that. Actually, I don't think enough trumpet blowing is done, actually, because there is so much heart and commitment that we have seen. I think that needs to be communicated internally, and I do wonder sometimes if employees always get to see that. I'm sure they do often, but can we do that more? And like you said, that there aren't enormous budgetary requirements for some of these things. This is simple human to human contact. Are you okay? Can I support? What more do you need? Is your manager well trained? How are you finding the job? And I think that's really important. It's that human element. And I would probably really focus on that point, whilst I'm sure there are many other aspects. For me personally, that is number one for me.
And I think with the sort of the training, what have you, you're probably doing that as employees generally anyway. You may not be telling people that you're doing it, but all of those human aspects, like the reward, sharing recognition. I go to a couple of award ceremonies. I'm going to one on Friday where people are recognised for their work, and that's just a small organisation that's just recognising its staff and hosting a little event just to recognise people so they feel really secure in their roles and recognised for their achievements. And that's recognising not just the care worker, but it's also the housekeeping staff, it's the laundry staff, it's the catering staff, it's the groundskeeper, it's all of those people as well, because they all make up a huge care team. And none of those things that you talked about really cost anything. You just need to tell people that these things exist, so people feel probably more sort of secure. If we were looking at maybe some of the more benefit and well-being side, what do kind of benefits and well-being actually kind of play as a role in terms of retaining staff versus pay alone? What are some of the other sort of values of those well-being benefits?
Well, I think it's that, I think, I can't remember, it's a slide that CJ did about the anxiety levels and stress, and reducing stress was one of the big drivers. So, we need to understand that stress. Is it a rota related stress? Is it the role itself? Are they doing too many hours? Are they doing too little hours and they need more financial help? So it is about making sure we've got access to that sort of mental health well-being. And who would have thought sort of 5-6 years ago we were talking about a virtual GP, so you've got to make sure you keep up to date with what's available from the support element as well. So we've talked about it. Everybody's individual, but ultimately, when we've done this, the surveys, and we've gone out to candidates, they're coming back to us with clear signals. This is what we need. So if we do offer as an industry some of the support from an EAP program to make sure that's visible, making sure people are aware of what it offers, I think that's a big gap in where we are in the care sector at the minute. Obviously everybody would like a huge pay rise. We can't offer that, so we've got to understand where we can make those small wins, and again put the belief in what people are doing making a difference. So ultimately, I think a lot of people come into care because they do feel that they make a difference, and I think we've got to make sure we put that at the forefront of our communication with our employees as well.
I'd also just say that people often forget what you said, but they never forget how you made them feel. And that really resonates quite strongly with me. I'm a very passionate individual, and I always interact very well when people have a real purpose in life. And I think that connection, that human connection, is really powerful. But on the actual physical benefits, we need to remember that your competitors are putting these things down. Not enough competitors are putting those benefits into their job ads, and those job ads are read not just by people currently working in the industry, but people working in other industries will also be scanning your job ads, and they're expecting to see benefits being mentioned in your job ads, as they very well are in other industries. So we do need to lean in harder, more faster with those benefits and demonstrate how that supports people working in our industry.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Julius.
Add just one thing very quickly. If we think about the total benefits compensation package, salary is important. Yes, we all know that, but it's definitely not the whole thing, right? It's definitely not even sometimes the most important part. There are a large number of people, think about young mothers or just anybody else, who for whom our flexibility regarding working hours is kind of like more important even. So just giving this amount of flexibility, some people might not be able to work 40 hours a week, but they can definitely work 30 hours a week, and you can do something about changing the shifts and things like that. So for some people, working flexibility would be a massive and very important benefit. So that's something I think.
And I think it's a great point, that, Julius, because we're talking about retention and retaining staff, which is fundamental. If you retain more staff, obviously you don't have to recruit more staff. Obviously that's it's very, very, very sort of transparent. However, you want to drive loyalty, and I think loyalty and retention are two slightly different things. So offering those personal things, again, even things like guaranteed hours, make sure your mileage is right, and sick pay, and all the stuff we've discussed here. You want to drive loyalty. Loyalty goes a bit deeper than retaining someone because they like working here. And I think trying to drive that loyalty is about being personable with your people, about listening to people, and making sure you make active changes when problems are highlighted as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And I think that's a point at which we will have to kind of end things for today. For those of you who have been on a few of these calls with me, you'll know that I harp on quite a lot about menopause support. We've got a largely female workforce, and one of our members did a fantastic piece of work just arranging some support for people with lived experience of menopause. And actually, they found that giving them some time and just doing something to support them actually saved them money in the long run, because actually people's engagement and people's experiences at work were very, very different. So many of these things that we can do actually add a huge amount of value and don't cost us anything, can actually probably save us costs somewhere down the line as well. But how we make people feel, I think, is a nice place to end on, because that is incredibly important. We want people to feel special, because they do an amazing job, and a lot of our workers are around challenging issues and stress on a day-to-day basis. In older persons care, there's an awful lot around loss, and we have to recognise that our care workforce and those that provide and deliver that care do have their own mental health challenges. And when you're surrounded by loss and difficulty on a day-to-day basis, we need to make sure those needs are supported and met. So look, a huge thank you to everyone for joining today. A particular thank you to Julius, Calvin, and Andrew for sharing the insight and practical guidance. As mentioned earlier, we will circulate a copy of the recording and any slides, along with contact details of our colleagues on the panel today, as well as Delphine, who I want to say a huge thank you to for helping to organise all of this and putting it all together. Delphine, you are an absolute superstar. We really love working with you. If you do have any questions, please feel free to follow up with any of these people directly. Thank you again for your engagement, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Cheers, Richard.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.